And this is near Issaquah, which is a suburb of Seattle. And she told us that she felt she needed deliverance. And she was a Christian. And I said, well, why is that? And she said, well, for one thing, my ex-husband's a Mormon. But for another thing, the last time we had sex, he had dragged me down the stairs by my feet to the basement of our home, pushed a door, a button, and a secret part of the basement opened up. There was this satanic altar in there. There were all these people in there. He threw on the altar. They tied her up. And he turned right before our eyes into a werewolf. He was, by the way, this guy was an airline pilot by profession. So just think, next time you're flying, your pilot might be a werewolf. Anyway, and he proceeded to rape her as a werewolf. And she had the scars to prove it. And she felt that because of something that profoundly evil, she needed deliverance, more so than just from being married to some typical Mormon guy. And she lived in mortal fear of this guy. In fact, she wouldn't come. We were working out of Saints Alive Ministry at that time, Saints Alive in Jesus. And at that time, it had a little parsonage right at the foot of this Cougar Mountain. And she wouldn't even come that near. We had to go to a church in Redmond, Washington, which is like probably 10, 15 miles from there, in order to minister to her. She wouldn't get that because she was so terrified of this ex-husband. And I could see why. Now, this happened to my dear wife and her sister. We just moved to this very same place in 1987. And I was going to become a full-time minister with this. It was an evangelistic organization to witness to Mormons. And I'd gone to a conference in Utah to speak. And so my wife and her sister were there. And we were only in that building a couple of months, and they hadn't even bothered to put a lock on the door because it was out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it was like out in the country, so there was no lock. And we were living in this split-level house. And down below us was another guy that worked in the ministry. And so all of a sudden, the first night I was gone, naturally I was gone, they heard this outside. And they started praying, what's going on, and my wife ran down the stairs to lock it. The door wouldn't lock. And so they did the thing like you see in the movies, they rammed a chair into the door, just to try and keep it shut. And they looked out the living room window, and there it was, looking at them back. And this is from a second-story window. And it was a werewolf, just like you saw in that picture. It was like, 7 or 8 feet tall, big, looks like, Arnold Schwarzenegger with steroids and fur. And just the growl shook the house. And they were praying, and they were pleading the blood. This thing could not cross the blood. It could not, even though the house was totally defenseless in the natural, it could not cross the blood of the lamb. It could not get in that house. And it was pacing back like a caged animal, which was good because we got footprints. And the foot was this big. And there was like 3 balls here the size of softballs, 1 ball here. Just like a super elongated wolf print. And people have asked me, well, do you think that's what Bigfoot is? No, Bigfoot's something else. But I think maybe sometimes that if these things are sighted in the woods or whatever, it might be mistaken for a Bigfoot because they're about the same size. But and I'm not an authority on Bigfoot like I am about werewolves and vampires, but as I understand it, Bigfoot, basically they have 5 toes just like an ape or a human being, but they're just enormous. And anyhow, I was taken to the vet to figure out what the heck was. We took plaster of Paris, is that it? Footprint casts of it. He said, whatever this thing was, it was well over 350 pounds. And its stride, he said, indicated it was 8 feet tall. And he said, I've never seen anything like this, ever, ever, ever. And the funny thing was, this happened before we had the thing happen with the little lady who had the werewolf airline pilot husband. And we wondered if maybe that was him checking us out. Because, of course, he was a Mormon. Devout. He was a bishop in the Mormon church. And maybe he was sent down to do us in. Because, I mean, at that time, Ed Decker, who was running that ministry, was like regarded as the leading anti-Mormon in the world. I mean, he was like, they thought him as the Antichrist, you know. So anyhow, so this stuff is real. I'm not saying that there's, you know, werewolves on every street corner. No, I'm not. But I am saying that they are wherever they are needed by the Brotherhood for whatever reason. And again, don't let Hollywood fool you. They aren't just confined to the new moon. They can turn anytime they want to turn. Although normally they will never do it in daylight because there's too much danger of being seen. But one thing about Hollywood is true. They fear silver. Now you might ask, why silver? Well, first of all, on a chemical level, silver is an antibacteriological agent. And some of you may take colloidal silver as a health remedy. But beyond that, silver in the Bible is a symbol of redemption. You know, Yeshua was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. And I don't know if you know this, but the tabernacle was built on silver. The foundation of the tabernacle was all made out of silver fittings. I mean, the boards were whatever, acacia, whatever it was, but the fittings are all silver. And so the idea is that silver is a symbol of the redemption of Christ. And so naturally, something that profoundly evil would, because believe me, you have to be, like, have more demons per cubic centimeter than the entire city of San Francisco to be a werewolf or a vampire. You've got to be pretty bad off, because the amount of demonic power it takes to make those transformations. And you might say, well, this just sounds too bizarre. Well, you don't know the power of the devil, number one. And you don't even know the power of the human body, number two. And I'll just illustrate with a couple of things here. Number one, and remember, when I am quote unquote glorifying the devil, remember, compared to the Lord, he's a punk. He is like a gnat next to the Almighty God. So I'm not trying to scare you. I'm not trying to glorify the devil, but I just want you to understand that there are amazing things that can be done. We had a lady that I was working with in a secular setting. I was working as a drug counselor, and she was a drug addict and also a gambling addict, profound mental health issues. And she would have to be admitted almost every week to the mental ward at our local hospital. And they would have to put her in restraints, either a straitjacket or whatever. And when she was in restraints, she would have huge gashes appear on her back. Huge, enormous gashes. When she was totally leather straps, arms and feet. I mean, her bed was soaked with blood. There's no explanation for that in a natural realm. We did a deliverance on her, and that didn't even help. That's what's called in psychology, big word, somaticization. See, this poor woman, when she was a child, anytime she did anything wrong, her parents would tie her up backwards to her little rocking chair in the nude and whip her with rubber hoses. And that's just unspeakably horrible. But she carried that with her. And whenever she felt the least bit guilty, that's how it would manifest. And that's just the power of the human mind. When we used to be into witchcraft, my wife and I were both master hypnotists. And we could take somebody, hypnotize them, and we could take a pencil and say, this is a red-hot poker, touch it to their hand and raise a third-degree burn on their hand, just like that. See, that's the power of the mind. Now, bring in the power of the demonic. And, like, how do you account for this thing where this very prestigious doctor saw a woman standing there 1 second and the next second a raven that was a tenth of her size? I mean, that's pure satanic power. So don't immediately discount this stuff, especially when it's in the Bible. Okay. You go to Daniel chapter 4. Some of you already know what I'm talking about, perhaps. In Daniel chapter 4, verses 14 through 16.